Hey guys, it's Holly Tate, Vice President of Business Development here at Vanderbloemen. And today I'm joined by Sutton Turner, our COO. And Sutton has a vast array of experience in running organizations globally. 4 of them were businesses, 2 of them were churches. And so Sutton, we're so grateful to have your wisdom on our team. And also so that you can help all of our clients who are churches and Christian schools and Christian nonprofits and even values-based businesses. So we've done a couple videos so far in kind of our HR series where a lot of our community right now is having to struggle through layoffs and reorganization and what is the best way to steward our resources during this crisis. So we talked about the 5 critical things we need to think through as leaders and put before the Lord before we even begin to actually start doing the restructuring. Then you walked us through how we think about our P&L, basically, the revenue that's coming in versus our expenses, and how do we prepare our budget forecasting for restructuring. And so now you're going to walk us through, this is going to be a little bit of a longer video, but it's so important of how we actually begin the process of restructuring. So I'm excited to hear from you on this because it's a really important topic.
Well, thanks, Holly. We talked earlier how key it is to have good leaders alongside. You can't make these decisions on your own. You need others. And so this is the part that you really need some key leaders to help you through the process. So as we're talking, we previously talked about revenue side. And from that, there's 2 things that we should have gotten from that exercise. One, what's the total amount that I need to cut and for how long? Okay. A total amount of expenses that I need to cut based on my revenue projections. And then the second thing is, what's the purpose of this Christian organization? What's the purpose of my church? What's the main thing? For a church, many people would say it's going to be Sunday service. For a nonprofit, it's going to be whatever is the main thing that you're doing for the overall good of the organization. It's what people are giving to because you do that work. And so we got to know the main thing. Okay. Yeah. So then with that on, the main thing needs to be at the top of our whiteboard. Holly and I love whiteboards. Okay?
Love whiteboards.
Love it. So
do you have one in your home office, Sutton?
I do. I totally
really?
have one.
I don't have one. I need one here on my wall. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the top of your whiteboard, you're going to write the main thing. So it's Sunday service if you're a church, most likely, and whatever that thing. For Holly and I, we work for Vanderbloemen. We do executive search for Christian organizations. We put Christian leaders, help put Christian leaders in Christian organizations, whether it's a church or a nonprofit or a values-based business or a Christian school. That's what we do. So on our whiteboard, it says executive search. Okay, that's the main thing.
Yeah. Then
I need you to go through a series of priority, and the way I do it is, and this is I'm using a combination of terms here, but this is what makes sense to me over time. You can use your own terms, but I look at things as must have, should have, and nice to have. So must have, should have, and nice to have. Now, this is where it's really hard. The first video we did, we talked about the people that are in the room.
Yeah.
So you start prioritizing, if you're a church and you start prioritizing ministries, the people that are in the room that directly represent those ministries and those staffs, it's going to be hard for them to make a decision on cutting something that they participate in. So it's really important that the right people are in the room to make these types of decisions. Okay.
Yes.
So the must-haves, and this is, every organization is going to be different. I can't tell you what the must-haves need to be for your church, but you need to go through them and you need to figure out what are the very most important things to your church. And pretty much what it's going to be is right around that that main purpose statement. So let's just say for a Sunday service, okay, that's your main purpose of your church. So there's going to be some things that are going to be tied to that. Right now, we currently know you got to have somebody that's filming and doing video. You got to have some worship. You've got to have, there's some components that make that happen that you need to capsulate, and people that you need to capsulate around that. Okay. Super important. So what is that? And you start, and so we're writing down on our whiteboard. Then at some point in time, you're going to have somebody, and they're going to say youth ministry. And you might draw a line and say, is that a should have, or is that a nice to have? Now, all of this is really driven by how deep of a cut that you had to make on your revenue. If you're only off 5 or 6% when you're doing your projection, and that's how much you have to cut, then a lot more of your ministries are going to be in should have and are going to make the cut. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about a 60% reduction in your revenue, and you're in survival mode, because 60% is survival mode, anything more than that's going to be definitely survival mode, you're going to need to be very clear on what's at the very top, because there's only going to be a couple of things that are going to make the cut.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we got the must haves, we got the should haves, and we got the nice to haves. And so you need to go through children's ministry. You need to go through men's ministry and events, the summer program, Awana, all of the things that have people and have budgets tied to them. And you need to go through them and list them out. You need to do it by programs and ministries, and not trying to do it by your actual P&L, because you need to be driven by the things that are important. In a minute, we're going to go through and we're going to figure out the people part of that. Right now, I'm just focused on what are the most important ministries, and what are the most important events, and what are the things that are absolutely. And that's how you're going to determine the things that need to be cut.
And that's really good, Sutton. Just to interrupt you real quick, I really like that concept, because it depersonalizes the restructuring process from the beginning. So it's not about the person, it's about the main thing. Right. And in order to do the main thing, these programs or these ministries have to be there. And then, so you're not even addressing the people part. So right. I think that's a really good point, and a great lens by which a lot of leaders can think through. Because a lot of times when you're a pastor, you might be having to lay off your best friend.
Yeah.
And that is really, really hard. And so this process can help you really logically think through the why rather than the who first.
Right. And so now you're into the stewardship decisions of, and I look at stewardship as time, money, people, talents. So there's a whole lot of, when you're thinking of the word stewardship, it's not just financial resources. Let me be very clear. The most important stewardship is the people that God's entrusted you on your staff. And so we have a whiteboard now, and it has the must-haves, it has the should-haves, and it has the nice-to-haves. Okay. By the way, nobody should see this whiteboard. Okay. Nobody should ever see this whiteboard. All right. Now you need to go through there, and the key here is on your must-haves, you need to have general agreement on who's in the room that's helping you make these decisions on the must-haves. Okay. And you might put something on the line, and that's okay. You can put something that's kind of must have, should have, and you can make it, and just so put it on the line. But basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to rank things. All right. And you're going to start at the very top, and you're going to take your entire roster of staff members. Let me be clear. This is the mistake that most people make. You're going to take your whole staff members, and you're going to put the best person to be a part of that ministry at that time. The best. Okay. So if Sunday service is your best, okay, who's the best preacher? Okay. That person needs to be on that team, and put that person's name there. And then you're going to go through here, and what you're going to find is you might have a team member that is on a nice to have ministry, but they are a super valuable part of your team. And if nobody had roles and responsibility, you would put them in a different role, because you would put them in a role that's going to make the cut of the restructuring of the church. And this is a really, really important part that most people miss. But you need to really think through who are the best people. And so you're going to look at capacity. You're going to look at their relationships with others, team player, leadership ability, all of those types of things. You're going to make those evaluations and you're going to put them. And I'm telling you, the most of the time when I've done this, I've shocked myself going, you know what, given the change of the situation and that we can't, everybody's not going to be able, we're going to have a pretty big resizing of the organization. This person is the best person for this role.
Yeah. Yep. That's huge. And I like your distinction there of the best. It's first we looked at what is the most important. Now we're looking at the personal part of it, the people part of it, and we're looking at the best for these, for the operation of the most important thing. And that might look like getting creative with your org chart rather than just plugging and playing of the way it's always been. So I think that's a really critical component.
You just brought up a really good point. Your org chart is going to change. So like it's totally going to change. So don't get stuck in, well, this person's supervisor and that person's supervisor. If you're having to cut 40%, 50% of your costs, the organizational structure will change. The reporting structure will totally change. Yeah. And so don't get caught up in, well, if we do this ministry, which is led by this person, it needs this supervisor. No. We're looking for the best people and putting them in the best positions.
That's great. Super important.
All right. So then let's talk about the equalization of pay and responsibilities.
This is your voice went downhill on that one.
Stinks.
This is a tough one.
This really stinks.
Yeah.
So what you've done is through so far is that pretty much you should have probably cut off, depending upon how deep your cuts are, all your nice to haves probably don't make the cut. Okay. Those are the easiest, those ministries, those events, those things, those are probably the easiest things to cut. There's also going to be some associated people that aren't up on the board in the must-haves or the should-haves that don't make the cut. Okay. So by your process, you've already eliminated people, but you haven't had to go through and say, not this person. You've just not put them up on the board. It actually makes the process a lot easier. Then you need to look at when you've taken all of the ministries off on the nice to haves, and you have gone through and figured out, okay, so what's my payroll cost now? So you've got to go through and somebody's got to compute that up and figure out, hopefully, the cut that you needed to make and the payroll reduction that you've already taken is enough to meet your needs when you compared your revenue versus your expenses. That would be amazing. So you'd stop right there. You're like, okay, we're done. Awesome.
Yes.
The problem is if you're not done and you're supposed to get to 60, but you've only cut 40% of your costs out. Wow. Okay.
It's hard.
Then the next thing I'm going to tell you is you need to look at your staff and your more highly compensated staff members. You need to think through and pray through if they need to take a temporary pay cut. So like, for example, in the CARES Act of the PPP, you can do a salary reduction up to 25% and still be eligible for the PPP. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, why do I say highly compensated? There's going to be a threshold that you're going to need to do that. Let's just say that we use the 25% number because that's what PPP use. So let's just say that you're doing 25% and you're going through there. There's going to be a level on your payroll staff that because you're cutting that percentage, you're cutting their pay so low that their ability to stay on staff is not possible. And actually, they're almost incentivized during this climate to go and file unemployment. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because their unemployment check plus the additional $600 per week, it could be as much. And so you're definitely not wanting to cut, because during this time period that you're about to walk through, whether it's 2 months, 3 months to get through this, this COVID crisis, The last thing you want is a staff member to go, why am I doing all of this? I could just be on unemployment and receive a check and be much. So you just eliminate that. So there's a point in time, and it might be 65,000, might be 75,000, depends on what your thing is, but you need to look at that and possibly taking a reduction in pay with your most highly compensated folks. The key is on salary reductions. It must be temporary. It will kill your culture of your organization if you don't make it temporary.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying, well, you know what, it can't be temporary, we just need to do a salary reduction, then you didn't cut enough from your nice to haves and should haves. Okay.
That is so good. Say that again, Sutton, because I want everybody to hear that.
So if you don't aren't able to do a salary reduction, and and of your most highly compensated folks, and to meet whatever cut you needed to cut down, okay, and you have to decide, you know what, I need to make these pay cuts permanent, because this is really what we're going to be at even after this. Then you need to reduce down more. You need to cut more programs in the should haves and all of your nice to haves. You need to trim it down way, way close. And if all you can do is Sunday service and some community groups, maybe that's all you can afford to do during the season. But you've got to return those folks to some type of a market-based system. Now, I will caveat that, and you might say, Sutton, my church is going to go from 1,000 people on a weekend to 500 people on a weekend. Okay, well then, yes, your church has totally changed. I'm assuming that your attendance, if you're a church, is pretty consistent. I'm actually, Susan, there's some churches out there that your online attendance is pretty incredible. And if they open church up, you actually might have more attendance. It's just your giving has dropped out. And so, and if you're a nonprofit, it's the same thing. Your donations have dropped off, but on the other side of that, you feel very comfortable that the donations will come back. So this is a temporary resizing and restructuring of your organization. But you're also probably going to get rid of some of these nice to haves, and maybe some of them might not be after August. You might not add those back. That'll be your own decision. But what we're trying to do is trying to get you to August, to this resizing place.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because again, we've said it over and over again, but I think it's so important. It forces organizations and leaders to think about what is the main thing.
Yeah.
Brings us back to that.
So we're going to make these salary reductions only temporary. That's super important. Okay. It should only affect your highest level staff members, your highest paid staff level. Okay. There's a point, and you're going to do the calculation, and your finance manager can help you, but there's going to be, depending on your state unemployment, there's going to be a point in time where you're cutting somebody's pay, and it's actually going to be more beneficial for them to leave and go on unemployment. You don't want to get to that. So that's the level that you want to make sure that you don't go into. Also, you need to make sure that when you're on the other side of this, and let's say it's August, let's say it's July, whenever it is, that your revenue is coming back to the pre-levels, you need to restore the salary cut that you cut those high-level staff members. You need to restore that back to the pre-level before you bring back furloughed employees, before you go hiring new employees. You need to restore that amount. And so it's really, really important to get that level of those high-level leaders back up as soon as possible. There's a point I need to also make during this time period, that you're going to have less staff members, and the most highly compensated staff members are going to be possibly reduced in their pay. The last thing that you need to do is to add more work or new work onto their plate. You have to realize that you have cut their pay, and because there's less people, they're probably doing a lot more work. So they're being paid less and they're doing more work. That's never a good thing as a leader. Yeah. It's not super incentivizing. During this time as a leader, you've got to create a future vision of something that's better. They have to have light at the end of the tunnel. They have to have hope. If you're a church, you have to really talk about the growth of the church and more people that we're able to serve in the future. If you're a company, about how the company is going to make a difference in this world because it's a values-based businesses. If it's a nonprofit, how many more people you're going to be able to serve. And so you have to create that future vision because it's going to be hard for everybody that's associated with the organization during that time period. And so I just want to encourage the leaders that once you go through this, you've got to be very careful not adding a whole lot of new stuff. And at the same time, you need to be really positive and hopeful because they need someone to be positive and hopeful because they're going home and they're not able to do the things that they used to be able to do financially. They're working probably harder than they did before this. It's a really tough thing for your staff to go through. And so I just want to encourage you during this time. This is a time for you to lead in a loving, lead in a hopeful, lead in a, there is a better day out there for all of us, and let's get through this together.
That's such a great point, Sutton. I do have a nitty-gritty question for you before we move on to how we actually execute these changes. For a lot of churches, the salary for pastors that are ordained is housing allowance plus salary. So when we're looking at having to potentially do pay cuts, are there any details that boards or church leaders need to think through as far as do you make that on the housing allowance side, on the salary side?
Yeah, so that's going to need to be an individual discussion because from a church standpoint, okay, let's say that the pastor is $100,000 and 60% of it's in housing allowance and 40% of it is in regular salary. To the church that's writing that check, it's $100,000 a year check. It really doesn't matter. So if they're taking a 25% pay cut, they're taking a 25% pay cut. I am sure that that pastor is going to want to maintain at least the same percentage level of his 60%. So he's now at $75,000 because he took a 25% pay cut. The housing probably hasn't changed that much. So they're probably going to want to, in most churches, the pastor submits to the board what their housing allowance is going to be for that next year. This might be a situation to where you're going to have pastors come back to the board saying, I'd like to resubmit for a greater percentage because for a certain period of time here, my housing is actually it hasn't changed, so it needs to be a larger percentage of a salary that has been reduced.
That's great. And I know that's a little bit in the weeds, but we've gotten so many questions about housing allowance through the PPP program that I think that's a really critical detail that maybe folks on boards might not be thinking through all of how that really impacts the pastor. So that's really helpful advice.
So Holly, let's talk about the last part. I know we're going long here, but let's talk about
this is so helpful.
The part that you are really involved in heavily, and you do such a good job of it, is the sorry. As I say ironic. The word communication, I'm not a very good communicator. So that was awesome. The communication part of this. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about from your standpoint, how to communicate some of these hard things. So we've done all the whiteboard. We've got the whiteboard built, but now how do we put it in action?
Well, the first is, and you've said this already several times, and I've even been able to watch you lead like this, Sutton, which has been super helpful, is I think especially in the church world where pastors are gifted with hope and positivity and inspiration, the worst thing you could do is go into a meeting or a conversation about this really difficult situation with that smile and positivity, because people are feeling, not only is there just an underlying anxiety right now, just in general, even if you're somebody who hasn't personally been impacted by COVID-19 and you're just having to social distance or quarantine yourself, there's just an underlying anxiety of the uncertainty of how long is this going to last and is this going to affect me? So I think it's really important to just acknowledge and say up front, this stinks, and this is really hard. And today we're meeting, and then just come out and say it at the beginning. Don't have to do a big lead up to it. People are probably expecting this because they've watched their friends or family already have to go through pay cuts or layoffs in some way. So to be able to just be straightforward and upfront about it in the most empathetic, you addressed this in one of our other videos of empathy. And empathy, all empathy is, I think people overcomplicate it. All it is seeing something from someone else's perspective.
Absolutely.
And so to be able to just sit in that as a leader and go, man, if I was receiving this news, which even as a leader, you're having to probably take a pay cut if you're announcing it to the rest of your staff, and to know how that feels for your own family, and to just be able to communicate with empathy of, we know that this is hard. This is the last thing. If there was anything else we could do to get us through this, we would do it, but we have to make this decision in order to get through it. And I think if there's any data, that you can share as a part of telling that story, I think transparency is always helpful. So as much as you can share data of projections, like the spreadsheets that we were talking about in a former video, you don't have to give all of the details of the numbers, but if you can show a picture of, a sample chart of what now looks like and what the future is going to look like, and how this change is going to impact that future, it's really, really helpful. But yeah, I think being upfront, being as transparent as possible, and then communicating with empathy rather than trying to sugarcoat or make things positive is the best way you can communicate decisions like this.
That's great, Holly. I'd add just two things. One, I would add, allow people, whether it's in a big group or small group, to ask the question, why? And they ask it in a lot of different ways. So why me? Why was I let go? Why was this person let go? And be able to have talking points for all the people that are leading around the why. Be on the same page. And allow people the question, to ask the question, why? And as a leader, you need to be able to articulate the why. You need to be able to explain it to them, why they're being laid off, why they're being furloughed, why they're being relocated to another ministry. They're going from a nice to have ministry to a have to have ministry. Why is this important? We need you. So you need to be able to answer the why, and then realize that after the changes happen and you've done some reduction in your team, the existing team has lost some of their closest friends.
Absolutely.
And so they're mourning. So yes, they're happy that they have a job, but realize that they lost their friends. They lost some members of their church. If you're a church, they lost some members of their community group. They might even y'all might have people that are relatives to each other on the church staff. Very common, and so it's going to be so realize as a leader, yes, you want to talk about the future and be hopeful, but you can't go from first gear to fifth gear immediately. You have to go through all the gears in between, and realize that there's some hurting people that are on your staff and that you're hurting as well. That's the one thing that you were mentioning about pay cuts and everything. If you're giving pay cuts, I'll just tell you as a leader, you need to take one too. And you need to communicate. Can't be guessing. You need to communicate that you're doing it as well. So you can't lead unless you're willing to do what everybody else that you're asking for that you're asking to do is doing. So you need to say that and be very clear. Again, during these times, transparency is so important because it builds so much trust. Because if there's something that changes and we have COVID-19 and it comes back in June when nobody thought that was going to happen, if you weren't transparent now, they're not going to believe you when you come back to them in June. But if you're transparent right now, you can come back to them and say, you know what, we didn't see this, and this is what happened. And so being transparent and building trust is going to be super important. Allowing people to ask why, and being comfortable as a leader on answering the question of why.
That's so good. And Sutton, I interviewed Chantel McHenry, our Senior Manager of Operations. We did a video that I would encourage everybody to check out. If you are having to go through reorganization and layoffs, we did a video specifically on how to do that remotely, because we've gotten a lot of questions about that with our HR webinars we've been doing of, I have to do layoffs, but do I wait until we're all back together to communicate it? Or do I do it now virtually? And so she dove into some really great advice on how to have those conversations over video calls to the individuals and then also to the staff. So make sure you check that out. Well, Sutton, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on this really difficult topic. We're really grateful for your leadership, and we hope that this was helpful to you who are watching this. Let us know if we can serve you here at Vanderbloemen.
Thanks,